in your community too. We're building a team, local, national, and global, with the Obama Presidential Center as our home field. A team unlike any other. Ours is focused not on taking sides, but solving problems. A team that anyone in the world can join. A diverse group, united in a common passion for the most important role in a democracy, the role of citizen. In our hometown and yours, we'll inspire and empower people to change their world.
Please welcome Obama Foundation CEO, David Seamus.
Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the Obama Foundation Summit. You just heard the president talking about his hometown and the team. I want everybody to remember January earlier this year when the president gathered with us here in Chicago for his farewell address. And for many of us, it was an emotional moment of contrast, because we all remembered that night in Grant Park, on that cold night in November of 2008, when a young president-elect, Mrs. Obama, and 2 little girls came onto the stage. And the message that night was the same message as what we heard in January, summed up in one line. I am asking you to believe, not in my capacity to bring about change, but in yours. That's the North Star of the Obama Foundation. That is what guides us and drives everything that we do and develop and handcraft in terms of our programming. But as he said last night on this stage, it's important for us as we go forward not to believe that we have all of the answers to the questions and the challenges we face. We have to walk the walk and listen. And so from that night here in Chicago in January, we began to listen. We heard from 60,000 people online who talked about the impediments to active citizenship. The president heard from hundreds and thousands of people in Chicago, in Berlin, in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in Jakarta. People who were rising stars in civic engagement, as well as those who were established about what they needed. We heard from people who were doing cutting-edge civic engagement about the gaps that needed to be filled. We heard from young men and women in cities and towns throughout the country about what was meaningful to them, and we have begun to put it together here. That's what this is about. So let me tell you where we are and quickly where we're going. 3 weeks ago here in Chicago, we had a training day. 150 18 to 24-year-olds, including an amazing group of peer leaders who led young people through the following. What is your personal value statement? Who are you and what do you believe? What are the issues that you care about? But don't get wrapped up in the easy yes, us versus them. What's the root cause of what you're facing? Then they transition to power mapping. For the thing that you care about, who makes the decisions and who influences them? And then they closed out the day with a basic idea of asset inventory. You're good at this, I'm good at that. Together, we can attack this problem. 2 more of those sessions here in 2017, and then a dozen more for people who want to get engaged. For the rising stars and some of the established stars in this room, we heard you needed to be connected. Yesterday you connected, today you will connect, and the connection will continue once you leave this place. And for the people who are doing cutting-edge work, we have an Obama Fellowship. 20 fellows will be named in early 2018. 19,500 people applied. And what the president said to us was, yes, engage with those 20, but find a way to make sure that those 19,480 are also part of our movement. Make it happen. And as part of our listening, which will continue today with breakout sessions with the foundation team, around programs like My Brother's Keeper, around the construction of the Obama Presidential Center, which will make Chicago the global center for active citizenship, for people to come here and convene with one another. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your stories, because at the end of the day, it's your personal stories that inform what we do. And let me conclude with mine. It was one of the great honors of my lifetime to go with Barack Obama to the 50th anniversary celebration of the signing of the Civil Rights Act. We landed in Austin, Texas, and we went to the LBJ Library. And you go into the rotunda and you see these amazing words: Medicare, Medicaid, voting rights, civil rights, and immigration. And when I saw the word immigration, I started to cry, because all I could think about was Antonio y Diolinda Simas, my mother and father, who had come to this country because of that word on the wall. And there I was standing as an assistant to the President of the United States. The President looked at me as I was crying and was like, "Come on, man, really?" Wiped away the tears quickly, walked into a green room where there was a gospel singer named Mavis Staples. Miss Staples was watching a video of herself singing at a freedom rally. And standing behind her in that room was one of my heroes, Congressman John Lewis, who was saying in that wonderful cadence of his, "What a wondrous thing it is that I'm about to introduce Barack Obama on this day." The president gave his speech and then came back into the same green room, and there were 10 people who had written letters to the president. And the first woman in line, this woman from Austin, Texas, hugged the president and said, "Mr. President, my little boy is alive today because of you." And she kept on repeating that. And then she turned to me and she said, "Young man," which was flattering. Obviously, she was obscured by her tears. She said, "Do you work for the president?" I said, "Yes, ma'am, I do." She said, "You tell everybody that my little boy is alive today because of what you did." On the flight back to Washington, as I reflected on that hour and a half, here is what I took away. It wasn't Lyndon Johnson and members of Congress signing that immigration law that changed my parents' trajectory and mine. It was my mom and dad and hundreds of thousands of citizens who saw an injustice and wanted to correct it. It wasn't a Congress or a president that signed and enacted the civil rights law. It was young citizens like John Lewis on a bridge in Selma, Alabama, living up to an idea about the individual power that each one of us has and how the world can be better. And it wasn't Barack Obama or anyone who worked for him that made sure that that mom's child had better health care. It was 2 million people who came together and said, "Yes, we can." Change only happens when people engage with one another as individuals and then bring it towards collective action. Citizenship, please remember, isn't just about your rights, and we should guard them zealously. It is about our responsibility to each other, to our community, to engage in a struggle that, as my old boss, Governor Deval Patrick, said, is a community that turns to each other instead of on each other. This is the central calling and challenge and focus of the Obama Foundation. And as you just heard the president say, join us. This is work that won't take a year or 2 years or 5 years, but it's the work that's most worthwhile doing. I look forward to listening to all of you in the days and years ahead. Thank you.
Please welcome Cecilia Muñoz, Ai-Jin Pu, Brian Alexander, Joe Gebbia, Hamdi Ulakaya, and Mary Kay Henry.
Good morning, everybody. I have to say that isn't the first time David Seamus has made me cry. But we're really grateful for his work, and we're really honored and excited to be here with all of you with this pretty extraordinary panel, as you're about to see. We're going to start talking about how to make change real, how we face the challenges that make change real in local communities and the global community, and we're going to focus particularly on the workplace, on employers, on what it takes to make sure that that they're part of lifting up their communities and the work that they do. And we have a pretty extraordinary panel. And their bios are in your packets, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time introducing them because we only have 50 minutes and we have some awesome conversation to have. So I'm just going to dive right in with all of you and kind of warm us up by asking what is the core value that drives your work. And I'm just going to start. I'm going to just introduce briefly. So this is Hamdi. He is the founder and CEO of Chobani, the yogurt company. So what is the value why do you do what you do?
Make delicious yogurt?
Yeah.
It's pretty good, by the way, so. No. Cecilia, it's really an honor to be here. This is really amazing. I had no idea, of course, whatever president touches, it becomes a magic. But seeing all the entrepreneurial minds on things that people do all over the world and in sectors that they are in, it just inspires me. You know, I'm going back with so many other ideas from the yesterday's session. I do it because I saw with my, eyes in the small community that I live, and I started my business in upstate New York, a tiny little village, how much it affects, how much it impacts, how much things change when you just do your practice of business, your entrepreneurship. And if you have a slight, adjustment to that and say, while I'm making my yogurt, while I'm making this factory to back to work, I'm going to implement this and this and this that I learned from my mother and my father, the things that I think it's right. And then you see that impact immediately, right away, and coming back to you, and you get excited, and you want to do more. And I always said, after a while, this is not about having more, it's using the platform to do more. And the business is a very strong platform to do more.
Thank you. Aijen, you lead the National Domestic Workers Alliance. Why? What drives you?
The word that comes to mind for me is the word dignity. I work every day with the women, mostly women, who go to work in our homes, caring for some of the most important aspects of our lives, our children, our parents, our grandparents, our homes themselves. We call it the work that makes all other work possible. And it's work that at its heart is about dignity, about nurturing the dignity in children and upholding the dignity of our aging parents and grandparents, supporting the dignity of people with disabilities. And yet that work is so undervalued in our society. And so what really drives me is just bringing dignity to that work, which has so much dignity and gives so much dignity, because of the potential I think that has to unlock in our economy. And I hope you'll actually join me today in recognizing all the caregivers and domestic workers out there and all that they contribute to our lives.
Amen. Thanks, Aijen. So, Joe, you co-founded Airbnb. What's the core value that drives you to your work?
Well, first I want to say thank you for having me at the inaugural summit. I'm super excited to see the ideas that come out of these 2 days together. And as I reflect on that, I think of the word belonging. Because the mission of our company is to help create a world where anyone can belong anywhere. And basically, right now, there's a host in almost every country around the world that's waiting to welcome you into a home so that you can feel like more of an insider than an outsider to that place. When people travel, it's a chance for us to get outside of our comfort zones, to experience new perspectives, to exchange new ideas with people, and in many ways, gain deeper understanding of the other. And so I think, as was mentioned yesterday, at a time when technology is sort of atomizing things, and we're spending so much time in front of screens. Our whole business is based on people getting away from screens. You can actually get off the computer and go out into the world to experience different neighborhoods and cultures. And it's happening today at a scale that we've only dreamed of. There's been 250 million guest nights that have checked in around the world. There's now 4 million homes in virtually every country on the planet. And really what we're seeing are people stepping into entrepreneurship through this as well. The hosts on our site keep 97% of the money that they make. And what we've seen is that of those hosts, more than half are women. And over the last 10 years, they've earned over $10 billion just by sharing an extra bedroom down the hall. So what we're seeing is this incredible impact of a global platform. And today actually marks, to the day, 10 years ago, my roommate Brian and I had a rent check due November 1st, 2007, and we couldn't make the rent. And this whole idea was inspired by how do we utilize the things that we have in front of us. There was a design conference coming to San Francisco. The hotels were completely sold out. So we blew up air beds in the living room, made a website called Air Bed and Breakfast as a way just to make ends meet, to try to make a rent check. We met 3 amazing people, and it sparked this much bigger idea that we could provide hospitality to our guests, that they could experience belonging in our home, and that we became economically empowered as a result.
Thank you. Thanks. Mary Kay, you lead the Service Employees International Union.
Yeah.
What drives you?
Well, fearlessness. And it is the value that is written about in the Obama Foundation booklet and is described as taking risks. And I think of the millions of service workers in this economy and the care workers that take a risk and stick their neck out and decide to join hands with other people in order to improve their lives. And it makes things that seem impossible possible. And Chobani and Airbnb are 2 examples of employers that made a decision because of the fearlessness of workers making a demand for 15 to raise wages to 15, which is an incredible accomplishment in the economy. And the fearlessness that I've had the privilege of witnessing is when people decide to step outside of what they normally think is possible for themselves because they want to improve their own lives and the lives for their children, and join together with other working people to create an organization that can take that good wage and make a good job and create the value that Ai-jen talked about the dignity of care work that has never been valued in our country can become valued when people have the fearlessness to take a risk and say, hey, what I do matters, and I want to figure out with you how we can change the world.
Amen. Brian Alexander, he's the author of a book called Glass House, which I highly recommend, by the way. So what drove you to your topic? Why do you do what you do?
Well, I'm a journalist, and so it's my job to ask questions and be nosy. And so when you see an issue that's disturbing in some way, you want to dive into it. I happen to have been pursuing a number of trends that I saw in the country and couldn't really figure out a way to get them to cohere into any real story. And then I realized through a long series of events that a lot of these trends were actually running right through the middle of my hometown, Lancaster, Ohio. And that by writing about the town and some of its distress, I could explore some of these other issues. So that's what I do, and that's my core value, is to ask questions, figure out the who, what, where, why, when, and try to tell the truth about them.
Thank you. So let me stay with you because your work really helps us identify some of the core challenges that we're dealing with. I'd love to get you to explore a little bit. What are we up against? What are the core challenges that you identified as you were preparing this book that affect workers and the workforce and that should animate employers?
On the macro level, the biggest challenge is an erosion and sometimes the destruction of the social contract. So what do I mean by the social contract? It's an implicit deal. You do your job and have certain responsibilities, and another side does its job and has certain responsibilities, and we all move forward in that way. It's my argument that we could not have had a better series of decisions and circumstances and events over the past 35, almost 40 years that would be better designed to erode and destroy the social contract. There have been a number of events that have happened, beginning back in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Communities and towns are a web, a social web, and you disturb one part of it and you end up disturbing the other parts of it. And so when you have things like financial engineering, or you have the destruction of unions, you wind up with fallout from that in a community or a town. In the case of Lancaster, you have low-wage jobs, you have a drug problem, you have some poor civic leadership, and the core spirit of the town gets removed. Now, having said that, I love Lancaster, and there are a lot of great people in Lancaster. In fact, if you've got a business and you want to look at a town, look at Lancaster, Ohio, because it's really a terrific little town. But it's been suffering, and it's been suffering for a number of reasons. And it's not hillbilly culture, okay? It's not. This is a period of over 40 years where people worked hard, and they didn't see the other side of the equation helping them out on the other side of the social contract.
Great, thank you. Mary Kay, so you heard Brian just talk about the destruction of unions, right? Unions have been the pathway to the middle class for workers for a long time, but union membership is declining. There are tremendous challenges right now. Are unions still likely to be the pathway to the middle class for workers in the future? What's that going to take?
I think working people will figure out together how to answer that question. And I think a 21st century thinking about what the organization of workers needs to be in a system where current law doesn't really allow domestic workers to form unions in the way that we knew them 100 years ago, but domestic workers coming together can win rights as they have in 8 states. And in our work, we've had decades of bargaining with healthcare employers in creating the foundation of a middle class in New York and California, but right here in Chicago, most hospital workers remain non-union. And if they were able to come together, we could, as a community, make a $9 job with no benefits, a job that people can support themselves on, like New York workers doing the same jobs, earning $23 an hour, fully paid health care. And so the idea is, what will it take to figure out the ways in which millions more service and care workers in this economy can do for themselves what industrial workers did in the last economy. Like auto, glass, steel in Ohio built the last middle class. And I think as a nation, when you think about what David Seamus said about valuing collective action, if we can figure out how to allow service and care workers to organize on scale and be able to negotiate over wages and benefits, we can, as a nation, create the most inclusive middle class that we've ever had in this country.
So you can clap for that. So let me turn to Hamdi and Joe. Hamdi, you first. So, I mean, you run a large company. Can you talk about how you view the role of an employer in the local community, but also the global community?
Sure. When I look at all the global issues and all the things that we're going through, I look at from a small town in upstate New York. And it looks totally different. So when I arrived to that town, I'm from Turkey. I grew up on the eastern part of Turkey, Kurdish background, farmer. And when this country welcomed me, and I settled in upstate New York, and I thought, oh, I'm feeling home again. There's cows and farmers and everything. My background is, I grew up, I'm going to be very honest, I grew up hating CEOs or businesses and all that kind of stuff. I never liked it. And I never wanted to be with it, never wanted to get involved with it ever growing up, because the same distance from upstate New York and a small town in eastern Turkey to the world of business is very, very similar. Why? Or all these injustice that you see in the world, and you sometimes rightfully so blame the field of business, field of large corporations and their CEOs not doing the things right. So when I saw this plant was for sale, it was 90 years old or maybe 100 years old. It was the last plant was being closed in that county, in that town. And I had the key, and I hired the first 5 factory workers that was let go. It was about 250, then 50, and I had the last 5. And we sit around the table and we said, what are we going to do now? And I said, well, let's start painting the walls outside. And Mike, who was the maintenance guy, and said, those walls haven't been painted for the last 20 years. Tell me you have another idea other than this. But that's how we started. But what I wanted to do is I didn't want to be the guy who I hated the most growing up. So whatever I was going to do, I was going to take that security check, that insanity check, that I was never going to be that guy that I hated. So here we are. The place is completely abandoned. People have left the jobs. This is the last factory was being closed. And it's the saddest feeling I had in a strange place. And here I am with a broken English and looking differently with the 5 factory workers. We're going to build this back up. And I'll go fast forward. 5 years later, that 5 became 1,000 people. That factory became one of the largest factories. Our brand became whatever it became. And then we built a plant in Idaho, one of the largest factories in the world. And I hired 1,000 people there. In Idaho, it was Twin Falls, Idaho, which is another disturbed area. But what I'm most proud about is when you light up this initiative and you say, we're going to build this and we're going to build this better. And we have nothing missing from anybody else. Yes, we are in small town New York. Yes, we don't have a lot of resources. We don't have a lot of money. We don't know a lot of people. We have never done this before. The factory was closed by the largest food company in the world that they abandoned, but that doesn't matter. And we're fighting with some big companies. That doesn't matter either. You know why? This community is made with the strongest, most honest, hardworking people I've ever seen in my life, anywhere. It reminds me of my hometown. On top of that, I can build an empire in a better way, better than the one who closed it. And I live an example with these 4 or 5 factory workers. With the community, we built that factory. Everything was done in that factory was done with the electricians, the technicians, the people who moved the earth, who built the buildings. Everything was done locally, right there. Now, what happened? Why did this happen? The new way of engagement to community, the new way of engagement to the workers or your colleagues in the factory needs to be done. Those days that when something bad happens, the factory workers you blame it, the community you blame it, and if something nice happens, the guys in the sky buildings takes the credit. Those days are gone. We have to be there, we have to be involved, and we have to have reason what we do every day. And the practice of business every single day is the biggest impact that happens in the people's community. Now, the unemployment in Idaho, for example, is less than 2%. The economic impact of that factory to the community is about $4 billion. 5 new factories opened in Twin Falls, Idaho. Upstate New York, after 25 years, the farmers start coming back. The grandsons and granddaughters start coming back, opening the factories. Houses are being built. All that stuff you see in front of your eyes. You know what I'm most proud of? Is people start trusting themselves again. I am no less than anybody else who lives in San Francisco, New York City, or anywhere else. And I tell my colleagues, in this surreal world where everything is in fast and social, where you're going to find the real thing is you go to these real communities. You get in touch with people who carries this amazing human qualities and implement them every single day in their relationship with their community, relationship with their neighbors, and when they work in their farms or when they build buildings. Those are human qualities that transcend centuries. And you tie into that one, you build on top of them, the answers comes back. We implemented, when we built these things, and say, you know what? This income of the ordinary worker is not right. Yes, we built this big business, but my colleagues who works on the factory floor filling the cup is making $15, $20 an hour. I make the math. Just how do you survive? How do you get good food for your kids? How do you not worry about your retirement? How do you get by? It's just this income inequality. I think it's a topic in everybody's mind. But I can do my duty. They work as hard as I did. We work together. We built this together. My answer was, they need to have a piece of this, not as a gift, but as a recognition. And my last word is, the biggest impact we can make as entrepreneurs and CEOs and businesses is to make sure at least the people that was members of our organizations and their families and their grandsons' destiny also is secured with the business that they work to build. Our answer was, they should be partners in the company. It's the thing that they've been part of. And these are the new way of coming in to looking at the people who work in the companies, in the enterprises. And then magic happens. And President mentioned yesterday, the beginning of everything is so important. You implement the DNA into that. Now, I don't want to live my beginning days ever again because it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. 5 years in the factory floor is not fun. But everything I do today is tied into what I've done those early days. Everything I do today. And the reason I do every single day is I've never seen anything that gets returned faster than the field that we do. We just do it, and then you get the response immediately. You just do it, you get the response immediately. And that's what I'm addicted. And that's why I invite everybody to go to the rural communities in this country, find the magic, start with something there, and see what happens.
Thank you. So Joe, your company is very different. Airbnb is very different. It's a modern 21st century company. It's a platform. And we had some conversation yesterday about the ways in which platforms can be moving around good things, but that can become also locuses for activities that you never predicted, that you never expected, that may not be as beneficial as what you went into it for. How do you make sure that you're accountable as the world changes, as the way people use the platform changes? How do you make sure that as a company you're playing a constructive role?
Well, I think at the most local level, it starts inside your company, inside your culture. I think we think of Airbnb as inside out in the way that we approach things. Our whole business is based on how well a host takes care of a guest. And so internally, we think, well, how good of a job are we taking care of each other? So literally one of our core values is be a host. And that means how do we serve one another in the workplace so that we know we can set the example for our host community externally. The second thing that comes to mind is how do we use technology not to empower people? How do we use technology to empower people, not replace or displace them? In 2017, our platform will have supported 1.3 million jobs globally. And I pulled some stats from Chicago just to get a sense of what's going on here. There's 6,800 listings throughout Chicago and in all of the many neighborhoods. And hosts here have earned $67 million. And guests have spent more than $264 million throughout the neighborhoods and local mom and pop shops, local cafes. What's really exciting is that most of the listings are actually outside the loop So they're in some of the less affluent communities on the west side or the south side. And what's great is that more than half of the spending of our guests stays in those neighborhoods. So that's like a snapshot of like at a local level. But if you want to zoom out and really look at what's going on in a global landscape, there's a lot happening in rural communities globally. So 2 examples, in Italy and in Japan. Now in Italy, there's about 2,500 rural villages that are contracting and shrinking. Some of them are semi-abandoned. So we're doing work in these corners of the world where we'll actually go into some of these rural areas. We'll help renovate rooms in some of these 1,000-year-old buildings, put them into our platform and connect them to this global community of travelers that is eager to see these parts of the world. Same thing is happening in Japan right now. There's a major population crisis. Japan's losing 800,000 people a year for the next 20 years, and it's hitting rural areas harder than anywhere else. So we've been engaged in projects that can take these incredible parts of Japan and connect them to our global community of 100 million plus travelers to generate and stimulate economic activity in places that wouldn't normally see it, because there's not traditional accommodations in the rural countryside of Japan. But if you can unlock the potential of these extra rooms or extra spaces, put them into a global platform, it can have some real impact. In fact, these rural hosts earned over $1 billion and hosted over 8.5 million guests. So that's a snapshot from like a local level to a global level. One of the other things that's exciting us is that we've made a living wage pledge with IGEN and the National Domestic Workers Alliance to help our hosts promote living wages to any house worker that they have and allow our guests to stay in those homes if they choose to. So maybe the last thing I'll say is I think it's really important that companies find ways to give back. I think Hamdi and Chobani are wonderful leaders of showing how you can leverage industry and private companies or public companies to really go above and beyond and do good in the world. And a quick snapshot of one of the things we're doing is how do we help put a roof over the head of people who need it the most? And when Hurricane Sandy hit New York a couple of years ago, it sparked this idea. We had a host reach out to us and say, I've got extra bedrooms in my Brooklyn loft. How do I volunteer those to those who've been displaced by the hurricane? And it sparked this engineering marathon inside of our company to create a platform that would allow people to do that. So since then, we've created a platform called Open Homes. It's been launched now in 90 countries during 20 or so different disasters. It's very active in Houston with Irma and Harvey, in Florida, in Mexico after the earthquake, and recently in Northern California during the fires. It's really an easy way to take the technology we've developed for our business and say, how do we apply that to those who've been displaced? And how do we allow anybody, host or not, to provide hospitality to those who need it? And in fact, in my breakout group yesterday with Krista Tippett, she had a wonderful quote in one of the packets we read, which is, when in doubt, practice hospitality. And I think that's something any company or any organization can apply.
Great, thank you. You can applaud for that. So, Joe just mentioned the partnership that the Domestic Workers Alliance built with Airbnb. It's not the only partnership that you've built, and you've had to, because domestic workers are not organized in traditional ways, in the way that service employees are organized, for example. You've had to get creative in how you move things forward for them. So can you talk about your approach to the kinds of partnerships that you build, and what are the obstacles, what are the challenges in making that happen?
Great question. I keep thinking about what Anand said yesterday about in times of darkness, we adjust our sight, our vision, and I keep asking myself, have we adjusted our actions enough? Are we adjusting our leadership enough? And I think about this saying that we have in our organization, which is that when what's at stake is human dignity, there's no such thing as an unlikely ally. And our work with companies are really built on this notion that this is a moment where, to Mary Kay's point, we actually have to take more risks, and we have to be morally courageous in our leadership in ways that we could never imagine. I have no doubt that our kids and our grandkids are going to ask us about this very moment in history and what we were doing. And I think we owe it to them to have a really good answer. And part of that, I think, is about taking more risks and, frankly, being riskier in how we think about partnership, because most of the challenges that we're dealing with in the economy and in our democracy are not problems that any one company or any one movement can solve alone. And that we actually need to be working across the private sector, social movements, the public sector. All of us together need to actually be in deep, risky conversation. And so I think about it in terms of what's going to prepare us for that level of risk that we take, and how can we draw strength from each other as we seek to take those risks. And we were really proud to advise Airbnb on how house cleaning markets work and how they're changing, and the potential power of their platform for good for this workforce, and to promote a living wage of $25 an hour for independent cleaners. That is a wage that house cleaners themselves set, right? And so it's like that kind of depth of engagement and listening and risky partnership is, I think, exactly what we need to be imagining. And we have been working with a set of technology companies. I mean, tech innovation is driving so much change in the way that we live and work, and that's been a theme throughout this conference. And we really feel like Silicon Valley in particular has done a great job of solving for convenience and efficiency. And we think that together with social movements like ours, we can now start to turn towards solving for equity and opportunity in this economy. And that is the task at hand. So we've been working with a set of tech companies to promote what we call the movement for good work. And we've started out with a set of 8 principles called the Good Work Code that are really about what it looks like to create good work in the new economy. Values like transparency and shared prosperity, a lot of the values that Hamdi and Joe have been talking about are really about how do we bake in equity and opportunity and a real place of honor for workers in the new economy, a real seat at the table. How do we shape the future of work together based on values that create more abundance, more opportunity for all of us?
So, thank you. Back to you, Brian. I mean, you just heard Ai-jen lay out a vision for how workers can be engaged with employers, with the community, kind of leading this conversation in a way that produces more for all of us. And you heard Hamdi say, if you want to find the best, the hardest working people, if you want, you called it a real community, to go to a real community like you found in upstate New York. You described your hometown of Lancaster in the same terms. I mean, short of importing Hamdi to Lancaster, which I think I would be for, like, what do you see answers? Did you find answers in the process of developing your book? You laid out the challenges, but do you have a policy prescription? Do you have an antidote here?
Well, I'm a journalist, so I'm shy about dictating any sort of policy prescriptions. There are some sort of very wonky policy prescriptions to talk about, having to do with carried interest is one example. The bankruptcy laws are one example, and I'm happy to get into a conversation with anybody here at the summit. I'll be around, so engage me in a conversation. We don't have nearly enough time to go into that sort of thing. But on a macro level, there's a philosophy in our country that really took hold in the late 1970s that was all about maximum shareholder value. The only social responsibility of a business is to shareholders. When you have that value as your only social responsibility, all kinds of other things fall by the wayside. You don't do what Hamdi does in his community. In the case of Lancaster, it's been through one takeover after another, a couple of bankruptcies, the major company that I write about there. And that has been, how much money can we wring out of the company for the benefit of our investors, for our shareholders? Just last week, another 32 people were laid off from Plant 1 at Anchor Hocking. Go buy Anchor Hocking glassware, somebody. And so we need to rethink, and I think we should really ask ourselves a question: what is capitalism for? What's it supposed to do for us? Are we supposed to work for it, or is it supposed to work for us? And if the object of capitalism is to help us provide decent lives for ourselves and our children, some reasonable level of living, and that's supposed to be spread with some equality across our nation, then it's not working right now. Now, some friends of mine had said, man, you're turning into a Marxist. And I said, I don't own a single Che t-shirt, and I was the president of the Fairfield County Teenage Republican, so it's not like I'm a fire-breathing Marxist. These were old values. Companies used to be rooted in a place. The plant managers, the CEOs used to walk through the plant. They used to play on the softball teams. There was this web of connection, and what we end up now is what the demographer Shannon Monad at Syracuse University has called the landscapes of despair. How did that happen? Well, we need to go backwards and say, how do we reform the finance system? How do we reform the rules around debt and leverage so that this sort of value extraction can't happen in the future? We want people to have personal responsibility. We have now a cult of personal responsibility in the country. Don't take drugs, be married before you have kids, on and on. All of which is good advice. I don't disagree with any of that. Where's the personal responsibility for the drug companies that sent 3.3 million doses of opioids into a county in West Virginia with 26,000 people? Where is the personal responsibility of certain hedge funds and private equity groups that extract value out? What's their personal responsibility? You're asking these people to have all kinds of personal responsibility, and you're condemning them as that's just that rural culture, that's hillbilly culture, they need to get a job, they shouldn't be lazy. These people didn't suddenly turn lazy. The guys I write about have spent 40 years in the hot end of a glass factory. They've worked their rear ends off for a long time, and they're proud of it. They're glass men. That's the title they get. I'm a glass man. I saw an obituary the other day of a guy who worked at Anchor Hocking, and the last line was he was proud to be a glass man. That's his identity. That's who he is. I'm going to bet you that the guys at Chobani, they go to the store and they see Chobani yogurt on there and say, I made that. You can't. A universal basic income does not replace that.
So these changes aren't gonna make themselves.
No.
Mary Kay, I could see you resonating with what Brian just said. So how do we? He talked about responsibility, not just belonging to people in the workforce, but to the folks who own the companies and who should be thinking about local and global communities. How do we get there?
Well, I was thinking as Brian was talking that the way those values get restored, in my experience, is through action. And when people come together and shine a light on those injustices, it's a way for other people to think, that's not right, and what can we do about it together? Yeah. And so, in my experience, when you asked earlier about the destruction of unions, my thought was the conversation about that distracts us from the conversation about poverty wage jobs in America, and that 64 million people are doing 2 and 3 jobs a day to try and make ends meet for their families. And we need to think more about how, as a nation, that is totally unacceptable to us. And lift up employers that are trying to say and do the right things, but also understand that there's a system change combined with a movement demand, as Ijen was saying, where people want to come together and make the fastest growing jobs in our economy jobs that people can raise their families on, have pride in, and identity about. And then the sort of other jobs, there's this foundation of service and care work of 64 million people, and then there's millions more jobs being generated by tech platforms that we have to think about. But I think my major concern is how do we catalyze the change and make people have the experience in this economy that we had in 100 years ago with auto, steel, and rubber jobs that were bad jobs and became good jobs because people came together and changed them. And I completely believe that it's possible that people will come together now in this moment because they're driven by this notion of what Aijen said, we're going to leave a better world for the next generation, and we're going to use our last breath to figure out how to make the change. And fast food, retail, healthcare, care work, childcare, domestic home care work, all that work has the possibility of being the foundation of the next American middle class that includes everybody, that has equity and opportunity at its root, and can restore the pride of communities like Lancaster, I think.
So for Hamdi and Joe, right, so Mary Kay's a union organizer. Really, Aijen is an organizer as well, right? So the world would have us believe that these are adversarial forces around this panel.
Right.
Does it feel that way to you? Right?
Look, I'm gonna. What he said is so true. I mean, it feels like he is in my town. He saw what happened in South Edmiston, New York. So the line is true. The current marketplace creating value for the shareholder. And somebody said this magic word. If you add into the law, it says, in long term, that solves all the problems, right? So if you create value for shareholders in long term, then you have to invest in communities, you have to invest in your employees, you have to train them, you have to pay them well, you have to do the things right, because in the long term, these people are going to be the majority of the people in the world, and then they're going to ask, while you're making this product, what did you do? How did you behave? How did you give it back? How did you make sure that people, went up, not went down? Because we must ask those questions as a consumer, as a citizen, and we say, we the people. We must ask those questions, and we make choices based on the answers or the answer that we think what it is.
Right, but
right? So the drug company is not doing it right, then it should be punished for it by us by not consuming those type of products, right? So we have choices to make. Coming back to your story, a lot of like unions or any other amazing organizations out there are being representations of the workforce that are in the place to make sure that they are treated well, right? I dream a place where you do not need those, because if you do those things, you shouldn't be in the field of business. You should be punished not to be in the field of business. I dream a business where founder, manager, whatever you call it, you're all in the same pot. There is no glass man treatment different than the other one is different. There is no such thing. The human dignity is not treated that way. Now, are we there? No. We have to fight for that. We have to fight for the minimum wage. And we have to fight the human rights conditions in the workplace. And it exists, and even in the Valley it exists. And we have responsibilities. When we see it, we speak. When we have a power, we fix in it. And if we are there, we practice. Now, every time you touch, it might mean lose of sales. It might mean damaging the brand. It might mean all the things that shareholder value might go down. But in a long term, if you speak now, if you act now, if you do things right now, you create a culture. What is culture? Culture is the engine how the place operates without written rules, right? If the rules means nothing, it's the culture is living, it's in there. And Joe put a culture in there. When you see Airbnb's name all over the place, whether the refugee or flood or anything like that, you will say, of course Airbnb will do that. It's in the culture. So we need to build a culture that respects the human dignity, especially the ones that work in the factories. And when we do that, we need to prove that if you implement all these values to your work, you're not less profitable, you're, matter of fact, more profitable. And you are faster.
Yep.
And this is proven and proven and proven again. And next person comes into the field and says, I want to follow these guys. I don't want to follow the other guys.
And I want to interject one thing.
Yeah.
The interesting thing is that we did this once. We don't have to reinvent this. We did it. It was called the New Deal. We had the Wagner Act that guaranteed unions that had some authority. We sort of went through this process once. Really, what we should be doing is trying to rediscover some of that.
Well, and Ijen, some of the premise of your work is that you are you talked about bringing non-traditional partners to the table. What does it take to make that happen, to make sure that the people who are doing the work are part of the conversation, driving the conversation?
I think we have to move beyond the transactional. And, there's been really strong business cases, right? And to Hamdi's point, it's true that if you think longer term, right, all of these things fall into place. But I actually think what's more important is the moral imperative of this moment and the responsibility that we have as market makers, as job creators, and as consumers and everyday people to create really good jobs, dignified work in the new economy. And I think that moving beyond the transactional also means it's a lot of work. You have to really put time and energy, and Airbnb teams spent endless hours with house cleaners getting to this place of the 25 living wage. And I think that it takes a real investment in that set of values, those priorities driving your company and your movements, and the partnerships to work together, the commitment, the investment and the commitment to those values.
So we only have a couple minutes left, and I want to make sure to, in some ways, close the way we started, and we'll go this way this time. We're in challenging times. We have inspiration to draw on, but for workers in this country, for the economy in this country, for inequality in this country, we got a lot of work to do. I would love to get a sense from each of you, what gives you hope? We talked about what inspires you to do your work. What gives you the inspiration that we can accomplish what we seek to? Starting with you, Brian.
Well, for me, still using Lancaster, Ohio as my avatar for many other places, there are so many great people in that town who want to be civically engaged, and many of whom are civically engaged, trying to do great things. My civic hero in my little biography is the after-school programs of Lancaster, which really started as a group of older women mostly, and a pastor who were in a poor neighborhood on the west side, who said, by golly, we're going to get a bunch of our kids' old school books and pencils, and we're going to go down into the basement of the church, and we're going to start a tutoring program. People do that still in Lancaster and many other places. That energy is there. Unfortunately, they meet headwinds. We're not making them easy for them to do that. It ought to be easier. They ought to be able to have more success because the willingness is there.
Thank you. Mary Kay, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is the people that believe that they can make the impossible possible. Like Sepia Coleman, who's a home care provider in Memphis, Tennessee. She works 100 hours a week. She earns $8 an hour. She has no other benefits. And she's trying to create the conditions in her life for her 2 children to do better than she's done. And by hook or by crook, she's going to make it happen. And she believes it's possible because she's part of a national movement of home care providers that believe that together they're going to be able to change things. And Terrence Wise is a second-generation fast food worker in Kansas City. He had the privilege of introducing President Barack Obama just a year ago when the president convened employers and unions and movements on how are we going to solve this problem together. His mother sat in the first row, thanks to the Secretary of Labor noticing that he and his mom hadn't visited for 10 years because they couldn't afford to see each other. She lived in Charlotte, South Carolina. He lives in Kansas City. He fought to raise wages in Kansas City. The state legislature overrode the minimum wage increase and stopped workers from being able to earn more. But he gives me hope because he just said to me last week, I'm not stopping until every fast food worker can live with the dignity and respect that they deserve when they're working for some of the most profitable companies in the world. And it gives me hope because we stand on the shoulders of people that have made it happen in previous generations, that we can achieve the dignity for every worker in this country. And I think together, especially in this moment, when the inequality is so vast and people are so clear that enough is enough, we can do better as a nation. That gives me hope.
Mary Kay. We're at time, but quickly, Joe, what gives you hope?
What gives me hope is that tech can actually be an enabler of more trust in the world. On any average given night, there's 2 million people either staying in a stranger's home or welcoming one into theirs on our platform. And to me, at a time when there's just so many narratives about our differences in the world, I see every single day people welcoming the other into their home and proving that we can coexist with each other.
Thank you. Hi, Jen.
What gives me hope is how many people want to be a part of the solution right now. I think we have among us the power to change everything.
Thank you. Hamdi.
This room.
Amen.
You know, people from all over the world trying to light up in a candle in their communities, whatever they do.
Yeah.
And it's a long journey. Sometimes people say it's impossible, but we are elevated. Once you are elevated, this common sense doesn't matter anymore. You just climb to that mountain, you make it happen. And you see this in a most secret, hidden places. You don't see it in the media. You don't see it when it's in front of you on TV or, when we talk. You go layer, and you put another layer, you put another layer, and then you find this gold mine. Mm-hmm. And the gold mine is the human spirit. And if you look at this country, and I'm here only 20 years, there's gold mine in every corner. Not only in this country, but everywhere else. You just tie in there, and you meet the right spirit person, you shoulder to shoulder, and you start building the dream. And you don't care if people recognize it or not. And you just do it because it's the right thing to do.
No better way to end than that. So please join me in thanking our panel, and thanks to all of you for being here.
Please make your way to your